Welcome, Emergency Prep sports fans. We're going to talk today about emergency preparation, which really isn't a sport, but provident living is kind of a hobby. People make hobbies out of gardening, which is provident living. Bottling fruit, that's provident living. And so being prepared for an emergency, being able to be self-sufficient in any situation is really kind of a hobby, and a lot of people are zealous about this. Today we want to talk about emergency heat for our homes. In connection with that, we really have to talk about disruption of the current service that we have. Most people in this area have a natural gas burning furnace in their home, which is their source of heat. And the kind of disaster that we prepare for around here in these parts is an earthquake, although that's not as likely as just a heavy snowstorm. But in any event, you could lose heat because a natural gas burning furnace needs to be supplied with natural gas in a pipe, obviously, and with electricity, because the fan that moves the heated air through your home runs on electricity. So a snowstorm that knocks out power could rob you of your heat. An earthquake that knocked out power could rob you of your heat, and certainly if it disrupted the gas line, it could rob you of your heat as well. Now, two things that are not part of this topic are, if the gas line gets broken, what do you do about the fact that gas is leaking inside your home or out? You really ought to have a way to turn the gas off to your home. And the gas company is in charge of leaking gas outside, but those are beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about here today. We want to talk about two approaches to emergency heat for your home. One is based on the assumption that infrastructure is not going to be restored very early. That is, you got people who want to put in a dual jet furnace which can burn either propane or natural gas, and want to have a big propane tank in their backyard which also is routed into their house so that they can just switch over to propane from natural gas and can change the jets on the furnace, and as long as they've got a generator to generate electricity, they can continue to heat their home the way they've traditionally done it without regard for the disaster. Many people see this as ideal, but frankly it's quite ambitious. And secondly, a dual jet furnace is expensive. Changing the jets is not easy to do, and most plumbers will not route a second fuel source into your house because of code violations. But the model where you're going to try and recreate all the same heat you had in your home before the disaster struck, with the idea that infrastructure is never going to be restored, is kind of a survivalist notion that has some traction with some people, but it's not the scope of what we're going to talk about here today. Today we're going to talk about the idea that infrastructure probably is going to be restored within a relatively short period of time, and we're talking about not heating our home in the traditional way, but heating it in an emergency situation from somewhere between 72 hours and a couple of months maybe. We're only going to heat a limited space in our home, and we're going to be bivouacking, so to speak, in a part of our home, and that's what we want to focus on here today. Okay, we just spoke a minute ago about the people who try and reproduce heat for their whole house in the traditional sense, buying a generator for the electrical part, the fan in the furnace, which, by the way, consumes a lot of electricity. You can't just buy a little generator and run the fan for your furnace, and who want to get a propane tank in their backyard. I just want to talk, and that is one approach to this, but generators are two kinds. Those that generate a lot of power and take a lot of gas or diesel fuel, and those which supply a more modest amount of electrical current and are more efficient with either gas or diesel fuel. The truth of the matter is that if you buy a gas generator or a diesel generator and you try and store 50 or 100 gallons of fuel for it, you're going to have problems with city and county regulations on the storage of flammable fuels. So my suggestion, and I should say right now, we're trying to educate people here with these videos rather than give them actionable intelligence where they can just go out and follow a set of rules, because in the end it's understanding the issues that will save you, because you will have thought these things through and made a plan for yourself, not going out and buying something you don't know how to use. But my suggestion with regard to a generator would be buy a modest one that can run 8 hours on a gallon of fuel. I have one in the backyard here that can provide 8 kilowatts of power and run my whole house, but it also consumes 5 gallons of fuel every 8 hours, which means you're not going to run it for very long if the gas station isn't open or you haven't violated rules by storing too much flammable material, not to mention the danger to you and your family to have 50 gallons of gas stored. So think twice about buying the huge generator. It has its applications, but it may not be what you want to do. Now, with regard to bringing a fuel into your home for emergency heat, you have all the same considerations that you would have when you originally put a gas furnace in your home. Like, are we going to store fuel, or are we going to have it supplied like the gas line does? The answer is you're probably going to have to store it in advance. Secondly, how bulky will the fuel be? Third, what will it cost? Although that's a minor consideration in an emergency. 4 is if you're going to store something like coal or wood to burn in a fireplace, you have the issues of the bulk of it, the bulk of wood or coal. If people say, well, I'm going to dig a big hole in my backyard and bury coal, and then I'll dig it up when I need it, and in the meantime I'll have topsoil for my garden. Well, in my neighborhood, what you're going to dig up should be thrown away. It's not topsoil. And secondly, if you pour coal into a hole in the backyard, the surrounding ground will leach the energy out of the coal over time. Now, this isn't going to happen quickly, but it does happen. People who are serious about this line the hole with plastic, heavy plastic, to keep the earth from leaching the energy out of the coal. And you might say, well, it was in the ground to begin with. Why didn't it leach out of the coal? And the answer is, yes, but it was in a seam of coal. The coal that you burn is the coal that got taken out of the middle of the seam, not the stuff on the outside where it's being leached. So it's bulky, and with coal and wood, you also have the problems that, frankly, fireplaces are fairly inefficient, and you're not going to be able to heat a limited space with a fireplace unless you happen to have a fireplace in a bedroom or in a kitchen like that. Also, to use wood or coal, you either have to store it inside, or you have to go outside to get it all the time, which means you're opening and closing the door. So if you think you're going to heat your house with wood, maybe you can. We don't want to make fun of that option. But you've got a bulk issue, and you've got the issue of you bring firewood in your house, you've got all the things that hide in firewood like bugs and rodents. When you bring a fuel in your house, you've got to be concerned about spills and leaks. And when you've got the gas company providing you natural gas to your home, you don't have that issue because you have plumbers and codes that are very specific about how that's plumbed and how that's brought in. And if you have a leak, you call the gas company. They put rotten egg smell intentionally into natural gas so that you can detect it if there's a leak, because naturally natural gas has no smell. But we have very few problems with leaking natural gas setups. But when we do, the danger obviously is explosion, because the natural gas does not rise, it settles. There's a spark, there's an explosion. So we have problems with any fuel that you bring into the house. You're going to have the problem of when you burn it, there will be products of combustion. Those are toxic if you breathe them. How do you get them vented to the outside? And you also have the problem of oxygen will be burned when you burn any fuel. Even if you can get rid of the toxins produced by combustion, how about the fact that you're going to get suffocated by the fact the oxygen's burned out of the air? That's with any fuel you burn in your home, even your natural gas furnace. That's why there are so many specific rules about the venting of your furnace. You've also got the problem of efficiency. Natural gas is extremely efficient to burn, it's extremely clean to burn, and is relatively cheap. That's why it's used dominantly as a fuel for home heating, not only in this area but throughout the United States.